Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 12 of Global Ethics. We're getting pretty close to the end. Next week is Thanksgiving, so no classes next week, which is exciting. Hope everybody's classes are going well. I want to say Happy Veterans Day to, if there are any veterans in the course, if you have any family members who are veterans. I'm not sure if I mentioned, but I was in the Marine Corps, so I'm a veteran. I just came back from an event on campus where the student veterans group was reading the names of those who had died in Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom in Iraq and Afghanistan. 6,635 names. Some of you may have heard, as you were walking across campus, you may have heard the names being called out. Anyway, it was a moving experience, and I was honored to be a part of it. Okay, so one logistical thing, I owe you guys some participation grades. Going to try to get them up this week. I apologize for not getting them up before now. I've been pretty swamped. Dissertation work is keeping me pretty busy, but I will get those up this week. And if you haven't, I've gotten a few emails. If you haven't had the chance to complete all the assignments, please go ahead and do so. You won't get full credit for it, but you will get some credit. So please jump in there, and I will give you some participation credit, even if it's not the full credit. Okay, so first I want to talk a little bit about Peter Singer and his article that we read last week, Famine, Affluence, and Morality. It was a 1971 paper, very famous. Gilbert Harman called it one of the most influential articles in the history of ethics, at least in the 20th century. And many, it shaped numerous scholars' work throughout in the years that have passed since 1971. Okay, so Singer he presents us with this scenario of the famine and starvation of the Bengal Liberation Army, basically, or you could apply that to any number of countries in the world. I think it's something along the lines of over 50%, maybe even greater than that now, is classified by the United Nations as being in poverty status. So we can say that approximately half of the world's population are impoverished or in a state of poverty. And Singer looks at, for the most part, the Western world. Singer's Australian, so he's thinking about Australia as well, which falls into sort of this westernized notion. And he looks at the relative affluence of these countries. And you think 50% of the world is starving, but yet you have this great concentration of wealth, affluence, more wealth than we need in these westernized, this small, relatively small, compared to the rest of the world, center of power. And Singer thinks it's reprehensible that these countries that have this wealth concentrate the wealth while there are people that are starving, starving and dying throughout the rest of the world. And Singer says that he wants to change where the line is between duty and charity, and he wants to come up with new moral categories of what we should do. Now, one of the things with morality in the Western world is that, as we've discussed before, a lot of our morality is based on negative liberties and not positive duties. Not that you have a duty to give to charity, but rather that we have the freedom not to have our speech impinged upon, which, if you can't, if it's a protection from having some right infringed upon, that's negative liberty. If it's something that says that you have a duty to do something, that's a type of positive liberty. Or you have the freedom to do that duty. It's a type of positive liberty. But in the Western world, the majority of our liberties in our society is based on sort of this negative conception of liberty. So that's why, to us, at least, it seems kind of weird for somebody to say, you have a moral obligation to give your money to these people that are starving. And that just doesn't quite jive with our, sort of the post-Enlightenment conception of liberty and society in the Western world. So when somebody says, you have a duty to do this, we're like, wait a minute, I'm an individual, I'm free, I earned this money. I can do what I want to with this money. If I want to go to an opera or build an opera house as a country, I'm free to do that. But Singer says we need to rethink these categories. And Singer, of course, he provides the example of the drowning child, right? And he says, if a woman is walking past a child that's drowning in a pond, and she can go into the pond and save the child, and the only negative consequences that this woman will bear will be getting her clothes dirty. So saving a child's life versus getting your clothes dirty. Singer kind of wants to draw, the same parallel between giving money to people that are starving, which I think it's important to recognize the gravity of the situation. I mean, oftentimes, we can put these things out of our mind because we don't live in a society for the most part. I mean, there are people that are starving in the United States, but if they are, it's mostly because they're mentally ill and they just don't seek the type of assistance that's out there. But there are people around the world who are living in terrible conditions, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's really important to get out and travel and see how the rest of the world lives, because it can really be an eye-opening experience. I don't just mean get out and go to London or Berlin and stay in the Grand Hyatt. I'm talking about actually getting out and seeing how the majority of people live. Anyway, I think that's important. But that sort of, when you have these experiences, that brings us face to face with the way the rest of the world lives, and that can, sort of open our eyes to these duties that we might have. So Singer wants to say that people are starving, and he starts off with the premise saying that we're going to say that people being sick, people dying, that's just a bad thing, right? And the controversial premise comes next, and that's where he says, if we can do something, let's see, this is his strong principle, without sacrificing something of comparable moral significance, we are morally obligated to do it. So if we can do something to prevent the people that are starving or dying around the world without sacrificing something of comparable moral significance, which would be starving ourselves, then we're morally obligated to do that. And a lot of people have a lot of problems with this because they say, okay, well, does that mean that everybody in the world should be just above the poverty level and starving, and close to starving, which seems a bit unreasonable. And, eventually Singer says, yeah, that's exactly the position that I want to hold. But he's like, okay, well, I can grant that might be a little difficult for most people to swallow. So what I'm going to say is, in his moderate principle, you are obligated to prevent these evils from happening unless you're going to sacrifice something morally significant. So maybe, your relationship with your significant other or something along those lines. Or, in order to prevent other people from starving, you're going to have to steal from somebody else. Those kinds of things, Singer says, this moderate principle or the strong principle will not call for that. But that still leaves a pretty wide gap. And that's where he gets into this idea of the woman jumping in to save the child. I mean, getting your clothes dirty is not something that's morally significant. So, okay. Another interesting point that he makes, and some people brought this up in the discussion, is this question of proximity. Don't we have an obligation to help those people who are closer to us rather than the people that are farther away from us? Singer says no. He says the distance doesn't make a difference. And this, of course, this hinges upon all the discussions we've been having this semester. Are human rights universal? And if you do believe that human rights are universal, then what argument do you have for saying that the person who is closer to you deserves better treatment than another person? If people have equal moral significance as human beings, then the person who is in Bengal has just as much of a right to to survive, as does Joe Smo down the street. Now there are lots of interesting political questions about that. I mean, have in the United States, we think we've entered into some type of social contract where we have an obligation to make sure that the people who are within our country are served before we have an obligation to help people in other countries. And that may be true politically, but Singer's saying it's not true politically. And he recognizes that there are practical effects that, in the previous